Hello, everyone. What a treat to see so many familiar faces and some new ones as well. So I'm actually in the museum today and longing that we could be in the galleries together, but I'm so glad we can come together virtually to do sort of a deep dive into a single work in the collection. So I'm going to share my screen, get that set up for us. All right. So as Rachel said, today we're going to take a closer look at El Matador, Felix Asiego by Robert Henri. And it is a unique opportunity because this is a work not only in our collection, but currently featured in the Americans in Spain exhibition on view in Baker Rowland galleries through October 3rd. So for those of you who don't know, Slow Art Saturdays is a program I have facilitated for many years and probably is my favorite thing I do because it's often on a Saturday morning where I can come in and just focus on being in the galleries with people, a lot of members, and looking at one work of art at a time. And we spend a full hour with the work. And so we'll talk a little bit about the process. And I just want to say right up front, though, that please do not feel that you are going to be forced to participate. I know this is a slightly different format. I will still be sharing hopefully lots of good information, and but we'll encourage participation, but please don't feel any pressure. This is meant to be a slowing down and a relaxing and enjoyable experience. So what is slow art? Well, first, let me start with the painting we're going to look at, just a quick snapshot of it. This is El Matador, as I said, Felix Asiego by Robert Henri. It's new to the collection. It was acquired in 2019. And as if you've seen the exhibition, you've seen it featured prominently in the exhibition as well as on the catalog cover. So what is slow art? It has been really practiced for many, many years in museum education. There are a lot of people that I have to give a lot of credit to: Rika Burnham, Elliot Kaiki, Shari Tishman, who've worked in different museums and universities to really sort of develop this practice and have been fantastic mentors. But this article from the New York Times in 2014, I always like to quote it because it's a great sort of framing of why we would want to think about slowing down when we go to museums. And it's also interesting coming through the pandemic when we've slowed down, maybe not voluntarily in our lives, and maybe focused more intently on things. So as this professor writes, we don't go into the library, read all the spines, and walk out and tell all our friends that we just read 100 books. So why would we think that about going through a museum, that we scan an exhibition, we keep walking by, and we think we saw all the paintings? We don't expect to understand a book, a work of opera or a play or music in that instant. And that instant, really, the average museum visitor, for those of you who don't know, is really 15 to 30 seconds with one work of art. So sort of a real snapshot or drive-by. And if you ever watch people in the galleries, of that 15 to 30 seconds, a lot of that is spent actually reading the label and not necessarily looking at the work itself, which is really what the artist gives us. And so I love doing this program, and I love doing it because looking with others, not just slowing down and looking ourselves, but looking with others helps us see better. It is those fifth graders who point out something in a painting you've looked at a million times and you've never noticed what they're pointing at before, like someone just put it on the canvas. And it's people sharing their questions or probing at ideas or really pointing out details that really help you see and appreciate and interpret more deeply into the work. So this painting is where we're going to start today. And really the process is we'll go through kind of three main steps. We'll first and foremost, with looking at the original work of art, what the artist gives us. It's not what we hear on the audio guide. It's not what we maybe heard at a curator lecture. That's all good information, and we'll certainly get to that. But really just taking in the work fully first. And then we'll have a chance to share some observations in chat. The chat box at a couple points. And then we'll go into a process of learning a little bit more about the artist, the artwork, sharing some contextual information, sort of deepening our thinking about it. And then we'll sort of come full circle and look at the work of art again and have a chance to ask questions or share additional observations or insights. So that's sort of the roadmap for us today. And I'd really encourage you as we go into the first part of looking to get as comfortable as you can. I think of slow art as a type of mindfulness to really spending a long, focused look on a work. And it's so hard to do. Our minds are probably currently racing with our to-do lists. If you have the news on, good grief, there's so much that can be distracting us and taking over our thinking patterns. So it's just a practice of continually trying to bring your mind back to a focused look, to coming back to your body. If you've practiced mindfulness, sort of thinking about your body in the chair, noticing your breath and trying to smooth it out. Sometimes it's not always easy to slow it down, but sort of just smooth and regulate your breath. Think of your body in the chair, your hands on the desk. So that's just a good general grounding technique as we do our close looking. And I also think of this as a process of resisting closure. By forcing ourselves to look a little longer, we resist the idea that we noticed everything, we saw it all, or we get it, or we understand it, that we just sort of keep it open, keep the work of art open. So we're looking at a long, tall, vertical portrait, full-length portrait. You've seen the title and the year it was painted. It is oil on canvas. I'll point out the dimensions since we're not looking at it in person. It is 78 inches high and 37.5 inches wide. So that's just about 6.5 feet, which really, when you look at the figure and the space he takes up on the canvas, it's really basically a life-size portrait. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start sort of a guided path through the painting. We sort of had a chance to glance at the full piece. And now we're going to, normally I'd encourage you in the galleries to let your eyes wander freely, but now we're going to follow a shared path because of technology requiring that. So we're going to start at the top of the portrait. We see this male figure. We're going to first take in his head and his face, his expression. You may notice the light, the color, the shadows, the highlights. There's also the space around him. I do want to acknowledge this is a very dark palette, dark colors and shadowy painting. So it might be a little tricky to see on your device, but you can come visit in person as well. And as we travel through the painting, there'll be some more areas of brightness. So now we're going to let our eyes follow a path essentially clockwise around the canvas. So we're going to make our way slowly from the figure's head and shoulders down to our right, his left. We start to take in his costume. Again, focusing on the right side first, the paint strokes, the brush strokes, the colors, and the details of his costume. I'm going to follow that a little further down now. Again, noticing what peeks out from the darkness on the canvas on the right. Some detail with the leg, the garment on his leg. And then we'll continue down again on the right-hand side. And now we see the emergence of the lower leg going down to the foot and shoes. And here again, take a moment to notice the space around the figure, the space he's occupying. So we've sort of traveled actually quite quickly down the right side of the canvas, down the body from head to toe. And now we're going to travel in reverse, up, focusing a little bit more on the left side of the canvas. From the feet, now up the leg. Again, noticing the garment, the costume, and the details as we come up towards the waist. You see his hand now on the left side. And we'll continue really on this left side to see a lot more detail now of a sleeve. And layering around the waist and torso, the various elements of the garment and the costume. And take in the brushstrokes, the colors, the patterning. And we'll continue up now, up that shoulder on the left, through the neck area, and back to where we started with his face and head. So really, you should all congratulate yourselves. We spent, instead of 15 to 30 seconds, we spent more like 3 minutes looking at the painting. Now I'm going to bring back the full view. I invite you to just sort of, again, let your eyes wander for another moment. Now that we zoomed in and sort of traveled around the figure and the composition, sort of notice how the parts fit together, the overall composition, how it holds together. So this is sort of a way of taking a visual inventory of what the artist includes, what those brushstrokes depict or describe in the work. And so this is a moment, I'd like to take our first moment to encourage anyone who'd like to put in the chat elements of the painting that you noticed. What, when you looked closely, jumped out at you about what the artist put in the painting. So Lisa shares that the left side is more detailed than the right. So we start to think about, the two sides. We have a figure sort of facing us pretty much straight on, but how are the two sides similar or different? And some more detail on the left. He has an unexpected expression on his face. Is it worry? Is it sadness? So also starting to try and interpret, noticing the physical description in the painting, but also trying to figure out who this person is. Who is Felix Asiego, the Matador? Elizabeth shares, I was amazed by the fact that the details were so loosely figurative when observed closely. Yeah, it's interesting. And when you're in the gallery, it's a wonderful thing to do with any work of art, to zoom in and zoom out with your body. We try to do it in Zoom now, but get close, get far away. Where do things, feel tight and where do they loosen up? And as soon as we zoom in, from a distance, we think of this painting perhaps as quite tightly constructed, but when we get in close, there's all sorts of loose brushwork. Unfinished tie, Carol points out. Yeah, so sort of the loose brushstrokes of the tie. And Julie shares, his facial expression is not what I would expect. I would expect to see much more bravado or ego. He looks a little tense or a little worried. And Trish adds, he looks sad, afraid, concerned. So again, we're moving just beyond physical description to try to imagine emotional description or character description or sense of personality, of feeling, all through the way the artist has painted the figure. And Jill says, I realize I don't know what he's holding over his shoulder. He's wearing a coat, so it probably isn't a coat, but doesn't look like a cape. Yeah, so trying to figure out the parts of his costume, his garment, which we'll talk about in a moment. Elizabeth asks, he also seems to have tears in his eyes. So the idea of, and actually I'm going to, again, because we're not in person, I have a few slides where we're going to zoom in again. So here's one with the full canvas, and then also looking more closely at his face as we started to talk about trying to read his expression. But when Elizabeth shared perhaps tears in his eyes, do we see moistness? Do we see a welling up, or is it hay fever? I like his expression, says Laura. Bullfighting is almost a sacred art, and matadors pray before performing. It is not necessarily a macho activity. Wonderful insight just to think about. So we know from the title, and we may have other clues in the visual depiction, we know from the title he is a matador, a bullfighter, and it is a sacred art and highly esteemed cultural practice in Spain, and it has a lot of ritual, a lot of ceremony, a lot of performance, and the idea of praying before performing, it is an incredibly dangerous act. And so that idea of being brave or macho versus being, scared or worried. Carla adds emphasis on eyebrows and lips. Yeah, so you can really pick out the weight of those thick eyebrows and the sort of the bold mouth in the painting. Jill adds there are very few colors, mostly the opposite colors of red and green and gold, then mainly brown and black. So that's these are all really fantastic observations. And if you remember your color wheel, red and green are opposites on the color wheel. They're complementary colors, which means they excite each other. They're going to bring out the intensity quotient of each other. So the red will look redder and the green will look greener. So we've got those complementary colors, but then also the green, the gold, and then those deep blacks and browns, both in the costume, some of the browns, and then the blacks in the shadows in the background. Really fantastic observations. I'm going to pull up another slide here that just shows what we talked about earlier, some of those loose brushstrokes. So the center image is a close-up where you can just see that sleeve on the left, and how just a click, a few quick slashes with the brush really, or daubs, I should say, really highlight those bright golds. And there's a little bit of white in there. I think the closer you look at the painting, the more you realize these little white highlights that appear. We looked at it in his eyes, but also on the garment itself. And then I added so the images on the left are from our collection website. And I add one on the right that I took myself in the galleries, which is sort of overcompensating. I think for the color, it's a little brighter than it would normally appear, but I thought I would just sort of add that because it gives a little more range of color that he clearly used, especially that purple sash. And then same down here, I have another view with his feet. So it's a little probably impossible to see on your view, but when you're in the gallery, you can read at the very bottom of the canvas. The artist Henri writes in both corners. On the left, he writes Robert Henri, Madrid, 1906. And on the right, it says Felix Asiego / Matador. So we know we have the title right when the artist put it on there himself. Oh, and Gwen adds his face is shaded on one side. So yeah, I think I have another full view here. Actually, let's go back to this one for a second. So yeah, just where sort of that emergence of his face being, we think about where the light is. This was painted with studio sessions as well as from a photograph that we'll see in a moment, and sort of how Henri, the artist, chose to light the figure. I think it's curious that even though he has all of the gold highlights, my eye is first drawn to the white of his shirt. Yeah, so that white really pops. We saw just little other tiny areas of white, but sort of that more concentrated area. It's also the center. There's a lot in the compositional elements that draw our eye in that direction in terms of movement and framing, and just that high contrast. So you keep coming back to the white, and which in turn sort of frames his face. These are fantastic observations. Thank you so much. So really, I wanted to, we've already started talking a little bit more about who we think he is. Robert Henri is really celebrated as a portraitist, celebrated as an American modernist painter, but especially for his portraits. And the fact that he painted individuals, full of emotion, personality, character, sort of what gets called vigorous realism. So we get a real sense that this is a person we could meet, and he also includes his name in the title. So since we started to talk a little bit more, I just want to make sure that everyone has a chance, if you want to add anything else about what you think about who Felix Asiego is, or his personality or mood that comes through in this painting, please feel free to add more in the chat. I know we had earlier comments about wondering if he's worried, scared, not necessarily being a macho activity of the act of just about to go into the bullfight. Elizabeth adds he seems very young. So maybe we look at sort of clues. Again, there's some looseness of the brushwork, but we can start to imagine perhaps a smooth, young complexion, bright eyes. You know, he looks fit and trim, so we associate that with youthfulness. Why did the artist leave the left arm in shadow? Now we always have questions. In our junior docent program, that's one of the main things we do is we encourage our fifth graders, those super smart fifth graders, to make a list of questions they want to ask the artist. And so we'll certainly want to encourage those as well. So why is one arm in shadow? One is more exposed, and one is sort of covered with that garment as well. Ooh, another interesting word to think about, he appears vulnerable. And then Carla adds, standing at attention and very intent in his profession. So that idea of, you know, can we see both strength and vulnerability, determination and hesitation? Are those things both present? One of the great things about art is that, right, there's no wrong answer, right or wrong answer, right? It's what we perceive. The artist can certainly have an intention to express, but we as humans, we're encountering another human from another time and really trying to do our best to read who he is. So I wanted to give a little bit of information now after these fantastic observations about a little bit more about the artwork and the artist and the context in which it's painted. When we do slow art, I don't always know a lot. We get to be really extra playful and make up a lot of extra stuff because we don't have much information from the artist about the artwork. And Robert Henri was someone who meticulously documented his work, probably one of the greatest documented artists in our collection in terms of volumes of diaries, letters, really detailed notes, photographs. So we do have a bit of good stuff to look at. So let's go forward again. And I wanted to show first a photograph of the artist on the left. This is a photograph in 1920. So he is now in his, oh, I cannot do math today. He is in his 50s, mid 50s, right? And so a little bit later than this period when he made this picture in 1906. And he's really known not just as an artist, but as a teacher. He influenced several generations of artists as a teacher in Philadelphia, in New York. And I include on the right a photograph of one of the classes he took to Madrid in 1912. So no surprise, our painting, El Matador, was painted in Spain in Madrid in 1906. So he took several classes. This is a later one that went in 1912. And you can see him in the group picture on the right-hand side, sort of in the back with his mustache. Again, he's younger in the photograph. All right. So Henri taught at a number of schools, the School of Design for Women in Philadelphia, the Belton School for Girls, the New York School of Art, which we see this class from, I believe, and the Art Students League. He had a number of students we may know well, like Stuart Davis and Edward Hopper. They're not featured in this photograph. And we all may know him as well, too, from our collection at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Thanks to the Abert family, largely, and some other generous donors, we have really a very important collection of Henri's work and some of his colleagues. So we'll think about this painting in terms of the work itself, but also its impact on his students and future American modernism. So Henri visited Spain 7 times between 1900 and 1926. In the exhibition on view, he's actually the artist who visited Spain the most frequently. And he included 3 visits with the New York School of Art, which includes this group that I show here. And then this really, as I said, helped disseminate the style, subject matter, and some of the qualities of Spanish art in many of the American artists who came back to the United States. So one other work in the exhibition by Henri, there's a number of works included, is on the right. And this is a really big idea about the exhibition and about Henri's work in particular and our painting of the Matador. So when studying in Spain, Henri would himself copy the Spanish masters. And we see on the left the painting of Queen Mariana of Austria by Diego Rodriguez de Silva y Velázquez. And I should apologize for any mispronunciation. Velázquez being one of the really important Spanish masters of the 17th century, known for sort of painting in this tenebroso or dark manner. And Henri was really taken with his work and wrote extensively about why he really admired Velázquez. So in his first visit, when he paints he does this copy practice on the right in 1900. He's actually on his honeymoon with his first wife, Linda. They spent 6 weeks in Spain, and he made several copies of a number of Velázquez paintings. And Henri said, I saw the Velázquez pictures. I was in the gallery for hours and then wandered the streets, thinking much to the glory of Velázquez. His paintings were clear of all the tricks of the art of the salons, free from much clutter of the ancients, simple and direct about men, and I'll say women too, rather than the incidents surrounding them. To me, they were great compositions. Each head or figure seemed to tell all the tragedy or comedy possible to man. And he also goes on to talk about just how Velázquez was a master colorist, that every stroke he put on the canvas was so well understood before it reached the canvas that it was decisive and final, just sort of his color, his brushwork, and that he was just above all other painters. And he also talks about his work having both great finish and looseness. And I think these are some important things to remember as we look at Henri's work. And he saw copying as really a way to learn much. And he's not the first artist. There's artists earlier in the exhibition that you'll see that did the same thing, went to the Prado, especially in Madrid, to study the Spanish masters. It's a way to develop techniques, color, composition, brushwork, sort of seeing the mastery and assurance in the realism and approach to subjects was one of the things that really defines Henri's looking at Velázquez. So what are we looking at specifically on the right? Portrait of Queen Mariana. She was the daughter of Emperor Ferdinand III and Maria Anna of Hungary. If you know Velázquez's work, his most famous painting is probably Las Meninas, with a little girl and sort of this amazing perspective. This woman in this painting is the mother of Infantata Margarita Teresa, who's in that painting. So Henri described the painting of Velázquez when he saw it as a most beautiful portrait, a wonderful fine thing that applies directly to my work. The costume is interesting, being one of those immense skirts, as broad as it is long. It is wonderfully painted. I'm most anxious to get a good copy of it. The more I work from it, the more wonderful it is. And I really think he emphasized the skirt being as broad as it is long. Don't you love it? So he really created a number of these works, brought them back to the United States as a way to teach from, use them as educational tools, and to inspire his continued work as an artist. So really, Spain has a huge influence on a significant body of work, especially portraiture and especially adults from a broad range of society. So let's look again, get back to our painting. We don't want to stray too far from the original work we're focusing on. And look at this moment when Henri meets our sitter, or stander, I should say, Felix Asiego. So this is on a second visit. 1900 is when he paints the first portrait of Mariana that we just saw. In 1906, he returns with his first class of students. And in addition to encouraging them to copy the masters and do their own work, he also begins to do his own work. So at this visit, he befriended a young matador named Felix Asiego, who's around 22 years old. Look how smart we are. We figured out he was young. He was a former law student who had become a matador. And Henri really became captivated by bullfighting as an art form. He had seen Asiego in a bullfight and really was fascinated by his gestures, his extravagant, decorative garments, costume, the emotional spectacle, and sort of this artful performance that it was. And because of that, he asked Asiego to pose for him. So you see on the left, a photograph of him in the ring, and on the right in Henri's studio. This is really exciting. You know, I wish we had anything close to this for so many works in our collection. So it is an older photograph, so it's a little blurry, but I'll show them now side by side. So here you can really see the costume. And you see it described, if you read the caption, as the manservant who's helping Asiego. This is painted just before he's to go into the bullfight. We even know the exact date, July 29th, or the photograph, excuse me, was taken on July 29th, 1906. And Henri worked both from this photograph and from multiple studio sessions, painting directly on the canvas. So Matador de Toros translates literally as killer of bulls. And the traditional garment you see here is referred to as, and again, pronunciation might be not quite right, so my apologies, as traje de luces, the suit of lights. And that really came from this tradition of including these metallic threads of gold and silver. So we can't see those in the older photograph, but you can sort of see and imagine, if you've seen contemporary matadors, that continues. These really metallic, incredibly glistening costumes. Sorry, my notes are flowing. And then you also notice the traditional hat, the white shirt that we commented on earlier. These are all, again, traditions that we're looking at 100 years ago, and you'll still see them today. The narrow necktie, that short jacket. There is a silk cape or mantle. I know we asked about that earlier, what that was. This would be more for the first part when the matador arrives, and then it's usually removed and then replaced with more of what we think of with the cape. And again, I'm not using technical terms probably, that's used to engage in the actual fighting with the bull. There are close-fitting tights that go from the waist to the knee. And then below that, you see socks or stockings that were often pink, sometimes white, red, and black, but we can, I guess, start to imagine pink in the painting. And then at the bottom of the photograph and the painting, we note that Asiego is wearing flat slippers decorated with bows, again, the traditional. So here we see the matador in full regalia in that moment just before the performance, before the drama and his unknown fate. The detail of the traditional costume really nods to the performance, the spectacle that's about to take place. But we get, again, to the mood or the feelings of the man himself. Henri said on bullfighting, there seems to be always a cool sort of prospect of injury, which they look in the face, and the fights I have seen this time have had so many accidents, almost fatal and otherwise, that it looks like a very foolish business. So he was fascinated by it, yet thought, wow, this is kind of foolish business if, it's so dangerous. But specifically about the painting of Felix Asiego, he said, after he'd completed it, I think I got the sense of that look on the face I noticed particularly in Asiego. He said when I asked him afterwards that he was always a bit nervous before the fight, and that he remained so until his first meeting with the bull's charge. After that, he feels no more. I'm going to read that line again because I think it's so incredible. He always feels a bit nervous before the fight, and that he remains so until after his first meeting with the bull's charge. After that, he feels no more. And just think back to some of the observations that were made earlier when we were looking closely of that, the contrast of being intentional, but also vulnerable. feeling brave, but worried, nervous and scared. And I just love that we see that without even hearing Henri's words. And now we can hear from himself that he was trying to capture that moment just before the bull's charge and all that emotion. All right. I'm going to go on for a couple more slides, and then I want to be sure to come back to, there's some great comments and questions in the chat. So no, I won't forget that. Henri, the artist, while he was in Spain, painted a wide variety of people. And so you see here in the gallery itself, now look how much brighter it looks on that fantastic red wall. So this is downstairs in the galleries. You can see El Matador in the center, and then flanked by two other portraits, all painted the same year in 1906 in Madrid. I do want to point out that the frame on El Matador is the frame that Henri himself selected in London before bringing the painting back to the United States. Again, all documented, which is just a thrill to have that information. So I'm going to look at, just put them side by side because I wanted to just share that one way to really consider a work of art is to compare and contrast, right? So you can always look at something and how it's similar or different to things around it. And what a thrill at this moment in time to have these two works on loan with the exhibition from two different museums in Nebraska and Chrysler in Virginia. These are actually a husband and wife that Henri befriended, Maria on the left, and just referred to as gypsy with guitar. It's a contemporary term that would no longer be used probably on the right. Maria was sent by Asiego actually one day when he was supposed to be coming to Henri's studio for a sitting, and sent her instead, suggesting a substitute. And Henri went on to paint her 3 times. This is the one full-length version, and then painted her husband twice, who was a musician, as you see here. And really, you think about the fact that these are these grand life-size portraits, and really these would be subjects from a broad spectrum of society, and that they may lack social privilege, but they're painted in this grand manner. And that's really what Henri continues to explore in so many of his subjects. And then he comes back to the United States. Of course, he makes these frequent trips, but the same year, after painting El Matador in Spain, he paints The Art Student from our own collection here in Milwaukee, back in the US. And this is Josephine Nivison, who was an artist, one of his students, and also became the wife of Edward Hopper. So if you didn't know that before, now when you see Edward Hopper paintings, which very often include his wife, she is often depicted in those works as well. So they're almost the exact same size. So when you come to the museum today, be sure not only to visit Americans in Spain, but come up to the American galleries to look at Josephine Nivison, the art student, upstairs. And at some point, when the exhibition downstairs is over, we'll bring them back together side by side. But just notice how he brings with him all of what he's observed, learned, applied in his time in Spain. And he would tell his students that it's so important to learn from the past, to study the masters, but we are not here to do what has already been done. And I think when you look at these paintings, we can see the influence of Velázquez and perhaps other Spanish masters, but they are uniquely, they are unique to Henri. They've got his signature all over it in terms of his style, this vigorous realism. They feel very modern, they feel very fresh, they feel very direct. And you really, I think, can appreciate how they look back, but also really how they look forward. This is 1906, and these feel like very modern works. And then when you're in the gallery visiting the art student, you can also see a number of other Henri works. We have more in the collection, but I wanted to show you the ones that are currently out on view. And I put them in chronological order, left to right, so we can, again, help place where our Matador falls in the timeline. So on the far left, you see actually an urban landscape, the street corner from 1899. So Henri was grouped with a group of artists that are referred to as the Ashcan Circle. And the idea, they were sort of painting this urban realism, these gritty everyday scenes. So you'll sometimes hear him classified as an Ashcan artist. His time in Spain really helps propel his interest in portraits, but you see he doesn't stick to adults. We looked at all adult portraits earlier. He also paints children. The 2 center paintings are from 1910. So just shortly after the full-length portraits that we've been looking at. And Dutch Joe was on a trip to Holland. He travels to other countries as well, though he refers to Spain as the country that he felt was the most, now I've lost my quote, just essentially said that it was the country that he found most interesting to paint in. But Dutch Joe was painted in Holland. So he paints in Holland, in Ireland. I was just at the Art Institute last week, and they have himself and herself, this portrait pair, in their American collection, in the Rum. And then our beautiful Chinese lady that's painted a little later. And you can really see, he paints this in California, and you can sort of see the richness of the bright palette changing with this figure now in California. So he said, as I said, he encourages students to not do what's already been done. And really his own work, he continues to explore different stylistic approaches, but he admires Velázquez and continues to go to Spain until the very end of his life. So there is a tight connection there as well. Now, one of the big deals about the El Matador coming into the Milwaukee Art Museum collection in 2019 was that it's a painting that plays a really big, marks a big moment in Henri's professional life. In 1907, he includes the work in the National Academy of Design in New York, their annual exhibition, but becomes incredibly frustrated with the jury process and sort of this academic limitation put upon the artists. And he actually withdraws, the painting is withdrawn just before the opening of the exhibition. So El Matador is not included in this annual show. And it's one of the moments then when he, along with other artists who come to be referred to as the Eight, put together an exhibition in 1908. Thank goodness for dates that correlate when you have a hard time remembering dates. If you ever want to remember, the Eight exhibited together in 1908 at Macbeth Gallery in New York. And this was a really big deal. That show brought together these artists who were quite different, but had this, again, interest in urban realism, everyday subjects, really breaking with 19th century sentimentality and looking at realism in it with a modern lens. So when you see Henri in the gallery upstairs, he is also with other artists from the Eight. So we've spent a long time with this, and now I really want to go back to the painting, and this is really bringing us full circle to where we started. So we come back to Felix Asiego, El Matador. And we've gone through the process of looking closely. We noticed a lot of details. We took a wonderful inventory of the picture. We started to make observations, interpretations on who this figure is, what he is feeling, what he's like, what this moment is trying to capture. And then we did learn indeed that a lot of our observations and interpretations really are supported by what we know about the artist and who he's painting and when he painted it and what he was interested in. So I include again the quote below of how Henri said that he was trying to capture this unique moment. So to, again, bring us to our original observations and this sense of getting to know the sitter, Mr. Asiego. Henri said, an interest in the subject or something you want to say definitively about the subject, this is the first condition of a portrait. The process of painting springs from this interest, the definite thing that is to be said. So this very intentional exploration he's making in getting to know this person and trying to really capture him on canvas and then share him with us, and how lucky that he is now part of the Milwaukee Art Museum collection. So we can go back to the painting again and again, which is really, to me, the thrill of slow art, is that we resist closure and we keep going back with fresh eyes and deepening our knowledge and our understanding. So, and before I get to questions, I did want to share that the upcoming programs that I really encourage you to go to, that are, one is as soon as tomorrow evening. There is with Spain's Islamic Heritage, and it's Eugenia Afaganova, who will be speaking virtually. And then two more in September, as Rachel mentioned. There's Rudy Maxa, so Travel in Spain, with Brandon Root, our Abert Family Curator of American Art, on September 9th at 6:15. And then our final virtual conversation will be with a scholar actually in Spain. So hence it will be at noon due to the time difference on September 30th. So some great programs. They are all available on mam.org events, and you can click on to sign up. And with that, I guess we'll return to questions and comments. Just a few here, it looks like, and I'll go back to the painting if that's okay. Oh, so Gwen said, are we surprised and impressed that with the number of women in the Madrid class? That's a really great observation. It's funny, and I really want to give credit to one of the great essays in the catalog, which is so good. The final essay, Spain is Different, the Prado, Velázquez, and Copying in the Art and Teaching of Robert Henri. I almost just read the essay to you straight because it tells you everything you want to know, by Valerie Ann Leeds. But she talks about the fact that there's a period when women are, I'm pretty sure that was in this essay, that there's a high number of women interested in studying with him because his first wife does pass away in 1905, and it's a few years before he remarries. But all kidding aside, that he did have a great number of female students, and he taught in women's schools as well. So it is exciting to see that. I will say that these trips to Spain also were a privileged opportunity. I mean, it was not cheap to do this. So I think that's important to mention as well. Did he work from sketches, photographs, posed people, as Lisa asks? Yeah, so he really all of the above, if you look at the full spectrum of his work, but photographs and studio work are what we know for sure with Matador, that he painted a la crema right on the canvas when Asiego was in his studio, and then he had that photograph as well that we saw. The Art Student is one of my all-time favorites, Trish says. Yes, it is. It's an incredible painting, and I'm thrilled that we get to see so many of that same format, you know, from the same year. So suddenly in the building, we have 4. We have the 3 down in Americans in Spain and the 1 upstairs, that just in rapid succession. He was incredibly prolific and worked quite quickly. The painting of Mariana, the one copying Velázquez, he essentially did in a week, which is unbelievable. And again, because he kept detailed records, we can actually know that. It's one of the #1 questions on a tour that you never know the answer to. But Henri, you can find out because he kept notes, and they say, how long does it take the artist to do that? And then Julie says, thanks so much. It's so impressive for an artist to be able to paint their subject's actual and truly felt mood, in this case, nervous. What a remarkable talent that is. Yes, to capture that in the painting so beautifully. Jill adds, I love this painting, the Art Student and the Chinese lady. They all feel intimate and invite us to wonder who the person is and what they are like. Agreed. Thank you for the comments. And yes, I think when you visit and when you see Henri portraits in other museums, as I just did, it's sort of, they tractor beam you across the room because they are so present. They're just like someone you want to get to know. You want to go over and spend time with them. So I hope with Henri you'll do that. And really, there's so much that you can find out about Henri paintings. And I'd also encourage you, I feel like I'm selling product here, but The Art Spirit is a great book that came out near the end of his life. And it's really a combination of many teachings and writings he did. And it's just an inspiring book about how he thought about being an artist, how he thought about being a teacher, he thought about his students, and just sort of, in some ways, living an artful life. So it's one very quotable, a lot of great passages. It's an enjoyable read if you're looking for a new book, The Art Spirit by Robert Henri. Laura adds, I like Henri's copy of Velázquez's Portrait of the Queen. It's in warmer colors and seems closer to the viewer. Yeah, we didn't do, if we were going to take those for a close looking, slow looking experience, I think we would get there with that same conclusion. Yeah, it is. And when you go see it in the galleries downstairs, it's incredibly warm and approachable. You think about that as sort of a royal portrait. Oh, I love the slow look. Ooh, and someone's going to help me out with more information here, I think, because, yeah, Cynthia adds the translation of the traditional clothing for the Spanish bullfighter is Suit of Lights. Yes, thank you. The Suit of Lights. Yeah. Great. Okay. And Rachel adds in the chat, yes, if you want to visit past member art breaks, they can all be found on the website, that link, and as well as that will take you to the YouTube channel. So it has been such a great run for this series, and really thank you so much for indulging the slow look. This was my first attempt to try to replicate it online, and it'll never be the same as standing in front of the real work, or the original work. But I really love how much you played along and contributed great insight. It made it very special. So thank you very much.